Hello, Mona.
Hi, Susan.
Oh my gosh, one of my truly favorite people. So I am so excited to talk about your work and especially this new book that truly it is. I'm hesitant to use so many fancy words because then people think, oh, you just say that, but I mean it. It's a game changer.
Mm.
So
Oh,
let me start with your bio and then we'll move into what this is all about, this idea of brain body parenting. Dr.
great.
Mona Delahooke is a clinical psychologist specializing in the development of infants, children, and their families. She's worked extensively with the multidisciplinary team supporting children with developmental, behavioral, or emotional delays for over 20 years in the areas of developmental screening, assessment, and early intervention services. Dr. Delahooke is the author of the outstanding book, Beyond Behaviors. Thought that you couldn't do anything better than that last book. But your brand new book, which is the game-changing book, is Brain Body Parenting. So I know you and consider you a friend and have seen this process in the last year and a half or so as you've been working on this book and then ushering it out into the world. And it's really something very special. In this book, you're offering an approach to parenting based on the most recent research in neuroscience and child psychology. So instead of it being kind of a top-down approach to behavior management that focuses on the thinking brain, you're teaching parents to consider the essential role of the entire nervous system. And you're claiming, and rightly, as I understand it, that this is what produces the feelings and behaviors that we want to help our children through. So give me like a top-down look at this book and what you're doing and what you're trying to share with parents.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on and talking about it with me, because it's kind of become my life's purpose is to help us, to help us understand what produces human emotions. But most importantly, I think I'm interested in resilience, because I know that when I was raising young children, I didn't feel resilient all the time. And in our world, especially after the pandemic, resilience really means flexibility through change. And to raise flexible children who can go through the ebbs and flows of life as they happen, and they will continue to happen, just gets me really excited. So the research, essentially what we found out, we meaning clinicians and the world, about the brain from those doing the research, which is young research. Relational neuroscience has been around for several decades. And that in real time, that's not that long. Right? For clinical practice, like education, for example, even mental health, to take what is being looked at in labs and in theory, and then figure out what it means for us as regular people, as parents, as clinicians. So here's the kind of the shift in what the research is saying, and especially now, is that the radical but simple idea that emotions don't come from our brain. They start in the body. So one of the researchers that I'm really following closely, and she's one of the 1% most cited neuroscientists in the world, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, she has a theory called the theory of constructed emotions. And she tells us that sensations in the body are what inform, not just for our kids, but for all of us. Those sensations in the body get encoded as basic feelings, like I'm feeling good, I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling yucky, I'm feeling sick. Those basic feelings eventually, through how we're socialized, can become emotion words. So that's one part. It's when we talk to kids and when we think that we can teach children how to be emotionally literate by just teaching them words to pin onto pictures and books, for example, that's missing the boat on the body. And that's one thing. I think our parenting literature is pretty cognitive centric, meaning, and believe me, this is no blame, no shame. I talked my kids up one brain and down the other for trying to have them teach them to be resilient and know their emotions. But emotional regulation, that real emotional literacy, is a developmental process. And the core of it that I believe Dr. Stephen Porges has really pinpointed is something called physiological state co-regulation. So that is basically helping our children's body calm through their storms, through our own calmness, through our own ability to understand and observe ourselves. So we're really talking about a new shift in going from thinking about how we talk to our children, from how we look at their what we call biobehavioral markers to understand what's going on deep inside of them.
Yeah.
And that becomes our way to customize our parenting to their nervous system, not to just what some expert says is the right thing to say, right? Like, do this and your child will be fine. It's more about studying your child and yourself. Sorry for such a long explanation.
No, yeah. So, I mean, and there's so much built into that response. So we're looking now, you mentioned this idea of regulation, and I talk about it a lot in my work. A lot of us are really interested, not in focusing on how to get a child to behave, or as you said, what should I say so that they'll behave?
Yeah.
But understanding more why it's difficult for them to. And we use the word regulation or dysregulation to kind of explain that when the nervous system or the organism of the child is dysregulated, out of a regulated state, then inevitably they will move in a direction that either pulls them internally into toward a shutdown state, or probably first into a more fight or flight state. Can you elaborate on that? You talk about that a lot, the pathways, and I love the book because it's so simple but so clear.
Oh, thank you. And I love how I just love how you said it in a sentence. That is the shift between managing behaviors and focusing on supporting nervous systems. So it's understandable that we focus on managing behaviors. Of course, that's important, right? We want our children to be well behaved, and if they do something wrong, we need to teach them. But the focus on managing behaviors, like you said, becomes less important when you go beneath that to look at what is causing that child to throw a remote across the room, for example, or to punch their sibling or yell at you and say something really hurtful. There's something propelling that beyond a child just trying to be a bad kid or, being rude. There's something, and it's called distress. It's called a stress response, which, like you said, can go through several pathways of our actual autonomic nervous system. That is our automatic nervous system. That is what connects, one of the big long pathways that connects our brain to the rest of our body through the vagal nerve. And when you have a shift in your body state, goes from feeling calm and connected and able to grade your thoughts and your body movements. When you move away from that subconsciously into that fight or flight state, what I call the red pathway, just think of it as when you go red, then you are no longer really in charge exactly of what you want to say or do, and your body needs to move. So when we see our children start to, or feel ourselves start to move in that direction, essentially, when we feel out of control, when they feel out of control, it's a good signal that discipline isn't really going to help, or putting taking away a privilege, or putting them in a timeout, or moving their behavior chart down. Those kinds of things actually add to a child's sympathetic nervous system reactivity and make them more stressed. So and I guess if listeners are wondering, does that mean that we are permissive or let them do whatever they want? Absolutely not. We can still hold nice firm boundaries of what's okay and what's not okay, but still be empathic to that child's nervous system being in need of what we call social engagement, that kind of
Right.
warm, loving adult that is going to share their calmness, share their calmness with the child, so that the child starts to feel calm themselves. And that's the kind of the guts of co-regulation, is sharing our calmness.
You know, I have a few friends who exude that, and you're one of them. I have another friend, I sometimes just call her answer machine because she almost never picks up. And by the end of it, one of the things, she wrote an amazing book called Go Only as Fast as Your Slowest Part Feels Safe to Go. And she'll
Wow.
end that line with, and remember, go only as fast as your slowest part. And I just feel more regulated. She has passed that on, as you do, when you're in the presence. And we know this is what we do with babies. We don't try and talk our babies out of their upset because we know that they can't engage on a cognitive level. So we skip that and we just are as calm and comforting as we can. But our children still need that. And then, of course, in a lot of my work, I'm interested in what gets in the way of parents being able to go to that place of calm, how we deny ourselves the things that support that.
Yes.
But you said something a minute ago about moving. Can you elaborate on that? When a child is moving into that kind of red zone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, what there's a word for what you just said in terms of baby. We understand that babies need us to basically regulate them for everything, right? They can't change themselves, they can't feed themselves, they can't soothe themselves. We really readily do that for babies. But when a toddler starts to walk and talk, assert themselves, and they seem so, they seem so adult-like, really. Sometimes they can accept a limit, and we're thinking that they always can, and that they have self-control. That's called the expectation gap. And that's another myth that I think we need to bust, in that, oh my goodness, controlling and accepting disappointments is a huge developmental, not only a milestone, it's a process. It just happens over time, over many years. But toddlers and young children, and even elementary school children, I get it. It seems like just because they can do something some of the time, that they should be able to do it all the time, but that's actually not how brain development works, and that brain body neurodevelopment works.
Great.
So how does it work? Well, in the polyvagal theory, the idea is that our different nervous systems evolved to serve important purposes, and the main purpose is protection. So when a person experiences, or I should say detects, threat subconsciously, meaning we're not always aware of it, the body is aware of it. So there's this process I call the safety sensor in the book, that it's a subconscious threat detection. It could be something that is invisible, likely is. It could be something like a smell or a sound, or a thought or idea that comes upon a human that sends the nervous system into this need to move. And essentially, movement is the characteristic of the sympathetic nervous system. And if you think about it, yelling, screaming, hitting, running, punching, kicking, spitting, those are movements, right? And the more agitated the movement, the more vulnerable the child or the adult's nervous system is feeling. It's detecting high levels of threat. And again, this does not mean that children are not feeling safe in your home. This is something different than that, right? This happens in safe schools with great teachers. It's subjective. It's not objective. It's subjective, that our little humans are not mirror images of us. They have their own reactivity, say even to separation, to separating from parents, where I'm seeing a lot of separation fears right now, school refusals,
Yeah.
Mommy and daddy, please don't go out to, their date night, and the child is just screaming and kicking because they don't want their parent to go out at night because of this hard transition from the pandemic
Yeah.
and other crazy things going on in the world, that they are exhibiting these stress related red pathway behaviors that are really protective and are temporary. So if you feel that your child is overreacting to a lot of things right now, especially as we transition through the pandemic, it's a common protective behavior we are seeing in children. Of course, it's not easy, it's hard, but there are ways to support children through it.
So this is the child who is now either internally just in their body experience, or by some perception of what's going on outside of them, has moved toward that fight or flight kind of aggressive, protective behavior. And we know that that's often what we associate with tantrums and meltdowns and things like that.
Yeah.
But there's yet a further distance that they can go if they're in a state of hyperarousal. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if their body is experiencing a certain amount of that kind of stress, where they're over aroused, where they are in a highly reactive state for either too long, or if the stressor is too big, then we have that other instinctual response that you described, it kind of like a turtle, like you go inside. That would be the dorsal vagal or the blue pathway, where people start to disconnect and actually conserve energy. So the hallmark of that pathway is conserving movement. Here's where you'll see kids who don't want to play. And that's a very big sign. If a child doesn't want to play because that's their natural language, they don't want to communicate. They may look through you rather than at you. And they may seem kind of hopeless. This is a pretty serious state if it persists for weeks or months. But I really want to emphasize that and then there are also blends of the pathways that scientists are looking at. But for these three main ones, it's important to remember that they're all protective and therefore adaptive. So a child who's in a big tantrumy response, their body is trying to get back to feeling okay again. So we know that humans, all of us, go through these different pathways throughout the day. How many of us don't feel like down in the dumps for 10 minutes or an hour, right? It's natural. But what we want to look for is if your child is like living there. If they're 80% of the day, they are disagreeable, agitated, refusing things, tantruming. Even a toddler, we wouldn't expect 80% of the day. We'd expect little parts of the day. So that's why it's useful to look at.
Can you share one or two things someone can do, particularly with a child is showing that stress response and moving into or in the red zone? When you talk about movement, what is something, I'm not saying that they can do this every time, but if a parent had the wherewithal, they had the time and the space and the moment, how could they help their child?
Yeah, so since we know the biomarker, they're called biomarkers, but what the body looks like, and I explain it in the book, but when you see the child moving from the green to the red, and you can see it in the facial expression, their posture, if they're gripping, if they start to sweat, if their face starts to get red, there's these little signs we can look for. So look for them as soon as possible, so that we can even maybe prevent a full-blown tantrum. But here's a basic little formula that is useful for when we see our child start to leave us and move into that other pathway or any of the other two pathways. It's called resonate and respond, RR. And resonate means that we actually don't prioritize our words, but we prioritize witnessing the child's distress. So it would be something like slowing down enough to look towards the child and, oh, wow, you know, it's not what you say. It's like, okay, I see this is, honey, this is hard. Or, uh-oh, oh my goodness. Okay, mama's here. Daddy's here. Let's see. Let's see. And you're kind of resonating with that energy that shows the child that you are, it's called attuning and matching. And you kind of move in the same frequency as the child. It's not like you're sitting there going, okay, you're upset, you know, but you're like, okay, I see you. I'm paying attention. There's a problem here, and I am going to help you, honey. So that's the powerful resonation that Dr. Porges calls witnessing, that I so think is an underused tool, is that sometimes, like even as an adult,
Yeah.
right, when you're really upset, doesn't it feel good for your partner to just like look at you and say, wow, I hear you. Wow, that's rough. Or how can I help if you're really upset, right? It's like, so the resonating is one thing we can do, just letting them know we see what's happening. And your work helps us know how to stay in the game with that, because in order to show up, we have to show up for ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? We can't pour from an empty cup. And this co-regulation thing has to do with our capacity to be there emotionally for our human children. And of course, we're not going to get it right all the time. And that's okay. We don't have to, right? We can repair when we're not there. Yeah. So the resonating. And then the second thing we do is we respond. And in the book, I talk about the different ways we can tabulate and customize our parenting based on the soothing strategies that work for your child. So we go through all the sensory systems and see what soothing strategies work, because kids are different. Some children would like to have a hug. Some don't want to be touched. Some want a hand on their shoulder or on their head. Some would prefer you to just stay away. Some like to have a song sung, some like quiet. So we go through each of the sensory systems because it's, again, in this initial process, it's not what we say, but it's how we are that's most important. And I think that's one of the key takeaways and of course there's a lot that we can say to them afterwards, and I talk about that in the later chapters. But in the co-regulation piece, it's a lot of it is sharing our emotional nervous system state with our children, and a lot of science behind that in the study of something called emotional contagion.
I remember when I read the first book that I emailed or called you and said, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, because you were leading up to what this newest book is going to offer. I cannot think of a parent of any age that should not read this book. I mean, it's just so rich. And in particular, what you're talking about there, you're not spouting from the mountaintop, you know, you're really saying, here is a very simple actionable plan, like an action plan. And you guide parents through the specific questions in each area of their sensory development and input, so that that parent can customize for their particular child what will help soothe the child and bring that child back to a regulated state. And this is why I love that you say we don't teach a child to self-regulate. It's not a teachable thing, but you're helping the child with your own presence co-regulate, and you're including the child to some degree, depending on the child, in helping reflect on, well, what does quiet? Do you think you like the lights bright, or do you like the lights dim? Do you think you like it when you're feeling overwhelmed? Do you think you would rather be in a quiet space or with a little music? What kind of music? And now the child is starting to notice and have some agency in terms of how to take those tiny baby steps toward being able to stay steadier when life is a little stormy.
You say it better than I can.
Oh, I know.
I love that. Everything you just said. Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly what we do.
But I love, and it's rare to find someone who's really teaching parents and providing kind of a game plan for parents to include their children, not in the let's name our feelings, which can be helpful, but it's not certainly not what you're talking about, but much deeper than that, to help the child start to get to know their nervous system. Like, I know my nervous system finally, and I know if I'm really tired, I am not a good person to have with a lot of people or a lot of noise. I can drive all the way an hour and a half to visit someone and enjoy having the car quiet. No radio, no podcast, no nothing. But I'm learning, and we can help our children, right? And
it's so beautiful. And I'm learning too. I mean, I think I'm always going to be learning, because for a large part of my life as a mom, as a working mom of 3, I operated outside of an awareness of my nervous system.
Wow.
And I happened to, my nervous system likes a lot of movement. And I think it's probably because especially back then, when I slowed down, then I realized how many problems I had, how freaked out I was. So it was adaptive, it's so it's amazing how our nervous systems help us. But yeah, I'm just so grateful for your reflections. And it's a gift in the chapter on self-care, it's also a real big gift to our physical health. Because some of these, many of these practices that allow us to develop awareness of our body state are implicated in reduced inflammation for adults later on. So it's incredible that something that's emotionally good for our kids can actually help you have less hypertension in your 50s and 60s, and lower blood sugar levels. I mean, the studies are amazing about these practices that allow the body to slow down and allow us to develop the ability and the ability to tolerate having some moments of self-awareness. That's what mindfulness is all about.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone, this is, if you only buy one parenting book a year, please buy this book. And please, Mona, tell people, because I know that you're doing various things to help parents, offer support. So you've got this wonderful book. Please share your website and whatever else might add to the wonderfulness of what this is all about.
Well, my website is monadelahooke.com, and Dr. Mona Delahooke at Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. It's a pretty unusual name, so Google it. Here it is. There are not a lot of Dr. Monas out there. And I have a new website now. I'm looking forward to having there are free videos on there. There's a blog and a lot of free stuff and other opportunities for training. So yeah, I'm just happy to have people visit there.
We did a class last year. I know we're going to do another one this year. It was one of our most popular classes. I can't wait either. It was such a joy. And I've always been super interested in the brain, even though I barely understand anything. It's so clear to me that who we are is way more complicated, and who our children are, than what we see on the outside, that everything makes sense when we look through the right lens. So
that's so beautiful. And you're right, it is so complicated. And even the top scientists, they admit they only know a tiny bit about the brain. So the good news is for people like us, normal people, I'm not a brain scientist. I'm just a translator, that we can understand the concepts in a global way and still put them to use in our parenting and in our clinical work. So it's like you said, it's not scary. It's we can know the global concepts and leave all the technical details to the researchers to work on for the next few years, and then we'll update as we go. Yeah.
Anything you would like to suggest or encourage parents to try this coming week, aside from, taking all this in and rethinking, perhaps with the help of your book, like how they might be viewing their child's behavior, but what's something someone could do this week?
Well, I've noticed, I don't know if it's going around, but I've noticed something really awesome in the world. And that is, I've noticed people, when they are touched by something or when they need some support, just putting their hand over their chest, over their heart. And so I'm thinking the main thing I think we need to do as parents right now is think to ourselves, be gentle on myself, be gentle on myself. Tell yourself that you can be gentle on yourself, because there's a lot happening. You're going through a lot. It's an unprecedented time. And so maybe that gentle hand on your heart or on your cheek somewhere will help you remember that you matter and you'll get through this, and you're not alone.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you again, Mona. This is Dr. Mona Delahooke. And the new book is say it again. I always get the words mixed up. Will you say it?
It's Brain Body Parenting, how to stop managing behaviors and start raising joyful, resilient kids.
I'm all over it. Thank you, Mona.
Thanks, Susan.